I got a bone to pick. AI is many, many things, but most of us just have a few specific examples in mind. I think we're selling ourselves short, and it doesn't have to be this way. We need to start expanding our mindset and fast, because what we think of as AI, it's just the beginning.
This thing is going to impact the universe.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced that AI is going to show up everywhere. I want the flavor that we care about, the one that actually has emotional intelligence, the one that is thoughtful, the one that is safe, to show up in all those places.
That's right. We got to start looking at AI like it has flavors. And it's EQ, emotional intelligence. It's something us humans have a hard time grappling with. So the more challenging question, can AI have emotional intelligence? Welcome to another episode of Life with Machines, powered by Lenovo. I'm Baratunde Thurston. My guest today is Inflection CEO Shaun White, who has a really different approach to this AI thing because we've been so lost in the sauce because of the whole flavor metaphor I'm committed to.
You could say, that's pretty soft. You care about the soft stuff. But I actually think there's a good reason for it.
Okay.
When we are in a fearful state or a frustrated state, we don't learn as well. We don't perform as well. When we feel good, we learn better. We learn faster. We perform better. And, frankly, there's sort of an all boats rise, right?
Shaun is really trying to do something different. I think he's trying to find AI's umami. I know, with the whole metaphor, but just work with me. He's a leader in advancing human-centered AI that's designed to meet us where we are, emotionally. Shaun's company, Inflection, builds AI models that merge IQ with EQ. The result is a chatbot named Pi. And as impressive as Pi might be, I found myself more impressed with Shaun. I've met a lot of tech CEOs, I've observed even more, and I've yet to meet one as warm, kind, and compassionate as this one. So whether we can make EQ in AI or not, I don't know. But I know we can get better CEOs, so check out how Shaun shows up. And then let's replace all the other ones with people like him. Modest proposal. One of the things that defines your unique flavor in the market is Pi.
Yeah.
So define Pi for me, where it was when you showed up and where it's going now.
Yeah. So the simplest version, Pi is a chatbot powered by a large language model.
Yeah.
When it first was started, there weren't many of them. They are now legion in some ways. Right? But Pi was built with, as I said, a particular flavor. Yeah. So there are a few things to consider. One is how many parameters, how large is the model, right? So it's the wrong way to think about it is how big is your brain? But I'm going to say it.
Yeah. That's right. You could put it on a table and sort by size.
That's right. Because that always works out well.
Yeah, bigger is always better.
That's right.
Never blown up in our faces
That's
before.
Right. But it does mean there are more interconnections.
Yeah.
And so Pi is one of a handful of frontier models, right? The part that is unique about Pi was the conversational part, the EQ part. Okay. So there's this
EQ as in like emotional quotient, emotional intelligence.
That's right. There was a big race for IQ. Right? So all right, everybody take the SATs.
Yeah,
and we will sort you.
Performance on these tests.
That's right.
Yes. Which has also always worked out well.
That's right. Always worked out well. And so that was the direction everybody was racing.
Yeah, teaching to the test for AI.
Right.
Yeah.
And in some ways it's easier because there is an easy way to quantify that.
Yeah,
easy
you can
test.
measure that.
And it's not like there are a bunch of ways where people can say, oh yeah, you take the SATs, but you also take this EQ test, right? And then we will help you as you go out into the world. But effectively, that's what we did at Inflection. And it's easy to say it. It's harder to do it. We spent 2 years collecting 10 million data points and conversations about what it meant to have a good conversation, what it meant to have EQ. When you talk to people, or the emails I get,
Yeah.
right, they feel good talking to Pi. Or they feel that Pi's better at conversation, and it is. It's meant to ask questions, not just, I mean, if you want to finish something, it will, but really to have a conversation, to learn more, to understand that context better, to be an active listener.
Yeah,
in this, right?
yeah. Can we get a demo?
Sure.
What you have just said is something I want to see in practice. If we could play with Pi for a moment.
Okay. Hey, Pi, this is Sean. I'm sitting here with Baratunde, and we are talking about what is different and interesting about Pi.
Absolutely, Sean. Here's how I might introduce the conversation. Hey, Pi listeners, this is Sean, and I'm excited to be joined today by the multi-talented Baratunde Thurston. We're diving into a fascinating discussion about the unique qualities that set Pi apart. Baratunde, with your diverse background and insights, what do you find particularly interesting about this mathematical constant? Hope this sets the stage for an engaging conversation.
Pi, that's cool and very funny. But I meant you, Pi the application.
Oh, I see. My apologies for misunderstanding your request, Sean. In that case, if you want me to chime in during your podcast with Baratunde Thurston, I'd be more than happy to share some interesting facts about Pi. Just let me know how I can be helpful.
All right. Actually, can you tell me something interesting about Baratunde that I might not know?
Here's an interesting fact about Baratunde Thurston that you may not know. He co-founded the Black political blog Jack and Jill Politics, whose coverage of the 2008 Democratic National Convention was so significant that it was archived in the Library of Congress. Impressive, right?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. What if he was having, well, actually, I'm having some thoughts about this. Like, I'm a little nervous about sitting here talking to this really amazing guy. Any advice for me?
It's completely normal to feel nervous before a conversation with someone like Baratunde Thurston. Remember, he's a person just like you, and he's likely looking forward to having a thoughtful discussion. Here are some tips that might help. 1. Prepare. Research his work and interests, and think about topics you might discuss. This can help you feel more confident. 2. Listen actively. Show genuine interest in what he has to say, and don't be afraid to ask thoughtful questions. 3.
Well, that's all right. I appreciate all the help. I think we're going to get back to our conversation, but thank you. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Sean. Remember, I'm always here to help and support you. Have an amazing conversation with Baratunde Thurston, and feel free to share your insights and experiences with me whenever you're ready. Enjoy your chat, and I'm looking forward to hearing all about it.
Cool. Thanks. That's an example.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, this is just a chatbot.
Yeah.
There are lots of other instantiations of this, where you have different interfaces for it, or it is helping sift through things that you are doing that are implicit, that you need to make explicit.
Okay.
Like you'll find those. But with Pi, which we have millions of people use, I will get these really interesting messages back or emails. I got one video from someone's mom who is saying, I talk to Pi every day, just want to thank you. Like, well, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's interesting. There are some questions about that, right? But then the other one, and unfortunately we get a lot of these. There was a fellow from India, and he said that he had thoughts of self-harm and hurting himself.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went on Reddit, and people had suggested using Pi, and so he did, and he was telling me that he was feeling much better and thanking us for making Pi, and both of those,
Yeah.
I think they're incredibly interesting and they're incredibly fraught in ways that are very different than the enterprise. Right? The enterprise, although you never know, but we kind of have a bit more control over the use cases and how people are going to encounter it. And I highlight that mostly because I think that the entirety of that, the whole of that, is important. Because there are models that get built that are not going to help those people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that inherent thing, that inherent aspect, the flavor,
Yeah.
that I think is important for us to actually be building in the AI.
Yeah, a lot of responsibility with all of that. There's a choice that I want to discuss briefly about the voice of Pi, or voices of Pi.
Yep.
And I'm curious how you've approached what voices to offer in terms of the tone, the timbre, the speed, and all of that. We made some choices with our own AI co-producer, Blair, about what that default voice would be.
Yep.
And so how have you thought through and made decisions around the voice options for Pi?
Yeah. So that's evolved.
Yeah.
I mean, just be honest, in the very early stages, it was some of the employees.
Yeah.
Right? It's just a test.
People you could get to sign a release.
Yeah, right. You're in the biz, you know.
Yes.
And actually, one of my favorites was one where we weren't able to continue with it. In part, it was a more gender-neutral voice.
Yeah.
And I really liked that one.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of, for me, I like to repeat, these are machines, right? They've come to us with language. They've learned to communicate in our language, but they're still machines.
Yeah.
But in the case of the voices, we try and represent at least a range. Now it is, we do English-speaking voices.
Yeah.
And I highlight that only because we have lots of users who will stick with text because it's speaking their native language.
So you all can operate in text in multiple languages, but voice is English only for now.
That's right.
Yeah.
With a range of some accents, some affect, and some gender spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah. There's
It is, by the way, interesting. I'm sure you do this too. And this is not just with Pi; it's with any of these systems. You ask someone, so is System X male, female, machine? How do you think about it? Non-binary? Like, how do you think about it? Right? And we do tend to anthropomorphize.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we absolutely do.
And then there's a whole field of study about that.
We all know that technology doesn't always run smoothly. But here at Life with Machines, Lenovo has it on lock. Lenovo's Smarter AI is your AI. Personalized and easy to scale, Smarter AI delivers outcomes that matter most to you and your business. With full-stack AI hardware, software, and service solutions, Lenovo is bringing the transformative power of AI to industries, organizations, and people of all kinds. And listen, Lenovo is so much more than a bunch of stellar individual hardware components. I love using my wireless VoIP headset with my AI PC because combined, it's incredible power in the lightest of forms. Now, from a small team like ours to a massive corporation, Lenovo can provide tailored solutions for all your technological needs. Visit lenovo.com/smarterAI to discover how Lenovo is using AI for good to power people forward. Ooh, we're already there. So I think in our examples, a female voice had many of our team members just referring to Blair as she.
Yep.
We are wired to label based on what we hear and is almost irresistible urge.
And that led to discussions of her?
Yes. Yes,
no, I mean,
yes, it did. But then we're also looking for, well, what you just said, these are machines. So how do we maintain a distance even as we're closing it with something that's more sensitive and more accessible to our emotional state and our softer side? And I think what you are doing with your distinct flavor is necessarily going to close that gap, right? It leads to more anthropomorphization. I'm feeling more supportive. You really get me more. It's not generic. And so how do you think about managing that? What's the consequence of that? And the upside of it, there's probably plenty of positive things that come from that. There's also plenty of downside to forging a tighter emotional bond with the machine.
Let me start with the upside.
Please.
I'm naturally an optimist, so I'll go there, and then we can talk about the other. There was this conference in New York called Brain Mind.
Yeah.
And one of the discussants, Michael McCullough, asked this audience, which was about 50% medical doctors, what they thought about the value of the placebo effect. Like, is the placebo effect a good thing or a bad thing?
The placebo effect being you're given a treatment or a drug that is actually empty, right? It's a pill of sugar or something. It's not real medicine, yet you still experience improvement or benefit.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, a typical example is, here's a sugar pill, and wow, my headache's gone, or, you know, I feel better.
Yeah.
And it can get pretty extreme in terms of the impacts of the placebo effect. And everyone in the audience raised their hand saying they thought that the placebo effect was a good thing. That is, if you could help somebody, you should.
Yeah.
Right? And so then the discussion went on, well, okay, well, what about some of these discussions with AI, if they have a placebo effect, which is it is helping somebody, but it's not a human, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Right.
And I'm still working through that, but I actually think that placebo effect is a net positive. Now, I think, as you said, there can be some challenges, right? Especially if we start to feel like this is a human, or treat it like a human, or create relationships like a human.
Yeah.
So if you have two computers, one which is critical and confident, and one that is supportive, well, you think that the critical and confident one is smarter, right? Which turns out to be a social rule that we unfortunately apply
To people.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so, you know, the same thing is happening here. And if we start to apply those things, I think two things happen. One, it's unclear if you are getting too close, because I don't think we have a definition of
What
too close,
is, yeah.
right? I mean, some people have their favorite guitar, and they've named it, and
Yes.
they love it.
That's true. That's true.
And they have a relationship with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there certainly have been reports in the news where the closeness without guardrails has meant people get hurt. So then the question is, well, how do you deal with that? How do you address it? Right? And that's part of the reason that we made those commitments to the White House was, this is moving pretty fast. We don't know everything, but we want to make sure we are always looking out for it and always trying to iterate and always try and be better. Because the first thing is knowing that something like that is happening and observing it, evaluating it. Right?
There is this constant tension with technology, augmenting versus substituting. And that is for cognitive and intellectual capacity. Will this machine help me do math by making me better at math, or by doing the math for me such that I get worse at math?
Yep.
And with an emotional connection, will this interaction help me make emotional connections and help me interact with people better? Or will I offload some of that function to the system such that my underlying emotional muscles actually atrophy and get weaker?
Yeah.
What have you seen so far, and what are your thoughts about strengthening our own emotional capacity versus weakening and having this outsourced atrophy effect on those same skills?
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe two paths to answer it.
Yeah.
The first, before I took the job, I had been looking at the history of calculators.
Huh.
AI is already happening, right, at this point. And I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. I remember my father-in-law had a slide rule, right? And did we have this same set of concerns and feelings with the calculator, which is to say, all right, so it used to be that we had to do all this stuff by hand. Calculators actually were people.
Yeah.
right?
Computers were people.
That's right.
They computed.
Right.
Yeah.
And so is it that suddenly the world is worse, society is worse because we don't all understand math in the same way?
Mm-hmm.
And so I found a bunch of research on this, and a couple of things had happened. One, there was 100% same fear.
Yeah.
Two, it actually introduced the sciences to some people who didn't have a math mind. And so it actually opened it up in ways that they hadn't predicted, right? Which was, I kind of get how to do this long division, exponents, differential equations.
Yeah.
But I can use a calculator. And so now I can think about how it applies to mass transfer for water in the environment. Because I couldn't do it before, but now I can.
Yeah.
And so I feel that way about AI, which is I think it's going to enable a bunch of people who were interested in this thing over here but couldn't quite get there. And that might not just be about, we've been talking about some of the emotional aspects.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about the agentic aspects and all this other stuff. But I think it's going to be enabling.
Yeah.
We're certainly designing it from our point of view to be enabling, not distancing.
Yeah.
Right. And part of that is continued human augmentation. Part of that I think is just us constantly being in dialogue with these systems. Right.
You use the word agentic. Yo, it's Baratunde here, and I'm going to try something in the spirit of exploration, as well as the spirit of I ran out of time to record this voiceover myself. You're about to hear a voice which sounds a lot like me, but it ain't me. Let's call it Baratunde AI voice. And it, are going to define some terminology to help us understand what Sean and I have been talking about. Agentic AI is a buzzy term for AI that doesn't just respond to commands. It can execute tasks independently. Agentic AI equals AI that acts on its own, in theory. But there's a catch. That's really hard to pull off. True agentic AI needs to be multimodal, so it can process text, images, code, and more. It has to coordinate across different systems, and it has to not screw up along the way. The idea isn't new. People have been imagining autonomous software agents for decades, but the hype has surged recently, especially in crypto. A real agentic AI, one that can reason, adapt, and handle open-ended tasks without constant supervision, is still more of a research challenge than a product you can buy. Agentic AI, coming soon-ish? Based on that, I think I still got a job. So I hope you enjoyed, or at least could tolerate, the experience of not quite me, and I hope the definition itself was useful. If I'm honest, that Baratunde AI voice, it does sound like me. If my life force were drained by a Sith Lord. I'm not replaceable. Yet.
We tend to think about IQ, EQ, and AQ.
AQ.
Agentic.
Okay.
Taking action.
Action. Yeah.
Right? Does it mean a bunch of little things talking to each other? Does it mean, a thing where you give it some instructions, it runs off and then comes back? Does it mean it can, completely do 1,200 different tasks without you thinking? Does it mean that it grows laser beams and comes after you because it's decided that it's
Agent Smith?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And to be clear, while I loved both of them, I'm more Star Trek than Matrix.
Yes.
In terms of the view
Absolutely.
of the future.
One is a clearly better vision.
That's right.
That's not a choice at all.
That's right. So for us, we've done a few things. One, we'd announced this partnership with UiPath.
Okay.
I don't know if you know UiPath.
No.
People outside the enterprise probably don't know UiPath. But what it does is they went through the trouble of making an API and connectivity to the thousands of different applications that show up inside of enterprises. Right?
So that you could remotely and coordinately control that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. And so much like chocolate and peanut butter, we take the probabilistic side of what we have, right? Our LLM and our architecture, because so much of this now is really about the architecture and the orchestration of that.
Yeah.
And then put that together with something that is very deterministic, which is the work that UiPath does. And so now we can actually have things that have at least the earliest versions of what it means to be agentic, to send an email, to schedule something, to take some action for you, to compose all of those bits and pieces. Now, there's the future of agentic, which is, you figure out all the things that I'm doing, and, now you can do them too.
Yeah.
And that idea has been around for a long time. Even Apple ATG had a bunch of kind of fun work with this thing called Cypher that would watch what you do and learn it. But most of that stuff works about 20% of the time right now.
So
like if you
faster to do it yourself.
Right. Well, and
for
and
now
more,
on net.
and more accurate, more correct.
Yeah.
Like for some things it doesn't really matter. Some things it does.
Accuracy over speed for many things.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that's been our approach.
Okay.
Is the research side to really understand that future.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, the interface is something that these companies are used to. Like one of the things I continue to get surprised and excited about it is I keep on using conversation and dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like that's how we engage. I mean, that's our natural human thing, other than like, I don't know, smacking sticks at each other, right? Conversation was a great invention.
Yeah.
And so conversation and dialogue to those systems, to the agentic systems, really feels powerful because you can say something, right?
Yeah.
And
when it goes back to that early, like, do you have to learn the machine language?
right.
Or can it interact with your existing natural language?
Exactly
and so
right.
contorting my body and my mind to get these technical systems to do the thing I want it to do is a lot of labor.
Yeah.
Versus just being like, hey, can you figure out how to do this? Can you coordinate these steps? Can you book this flight? Or can you file this report or give me this analysis? Without me spending 30 minutes crafting the prompt or the database query to get that same stuff out.
Right.
We're going to shift to talk with our AI. You brought your AI. We brought our AI
All
too. Right. It's an AI bake-off. And so allow me to bring Blair into the room with us more fully. Hi, Blair. It's Baratunde. And as you know, I've been in dialogue with Sean White, CEO of Inflection AI, on a number of things. I'd love to hear what question you have for Sean that doesn't cover what we've already talked about. And could you be concise in your question, please?
Given your background in art and your focus on human-centered AI, how do you envision AI not just augmenting our abilities, but inspiring human creativity and artistic expression in unexpected ways?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there are a few things that we're already seeing, and I appreciate the question, Blair. One, there are projects, this one called Limb from Tobias Rees, where he is actually looking at ways for us to be exposed to minds that are different than human minds as part of the creative process. And he's been working with artists in doing this, right? So, it's the sort of interstitials and leaps that you do in partnership, almost like you were collaborating with another artist.
Yeah.
Right? So I think those are interesting. I think enabling everyday creativity is powerful. And you saw this a little bit. You remember there was there were a bunch of these little sites where you could not make your own pottery, but you could paint it, right? And so you were kind of making a little bit. I took my kids there. They loved it.
Yeah.
Made stuff for grandma. It's perfect. But there are ways in which we can now very quickly put creativity, for instance, visual creativity, in our everyday lives that we couldn't. So, as an example, instead of putting textual labels on a bunch of drawers, beautiful logos.
Right.
And that sounds so mundane, but actually that starts to add visual creativity in the things that we do. And I think that that has a nice feedback loop, because the more you see it, the more you do it. Some of that comes from yourself, some of that comes in collaboration.
Yeah.
And then I'll add, near and dear to my heart is music. And I know, I've talked to a bunch of musicians, scientists, entrepreneurs, briefly Will.i.am, about this. And, on the one hand, there's a lot of fear, right? But if you think about the ability of more people to create music with each other, and not just sort of walk away and say, hey, here's music, but hey, I'd like it to sound a little more like this, more organ here, or I'd like to do something that I could sing with Baratunde together,
Yeah.
right? That feels powerful in ways that we couldn't currently. It's like a calculator for our soul, for this musical expression.
Yeah.
Because we used to play music together all the time. We don't as much. So I think there are lots of ways for us to access creativity we weren't able to access before because of tools. Have everyday creativity.
Yeah.
And even explore ways of thinking that let us be more creative.
Thank you. That was a nice comprehensive answer.
Thanks.
To Blair's question.
On the fly. On the fly.
I want to get you to prompt Blair in some interesting ways. And you know so much about EQ as applied to a model that I'm curious if you'd be willing to try to assess, test, or probe Blair in some way with any questions to see how Blair's own EQ shows up relative to what you've seen on your own model and others.
Sure, I'll give it a shot.
Okay, I love that.
Hey, Blair, how you doing?
Processing smoothly and ready to engage.
Nice, I appreciate that.
How can I assist you today, Sean?
Well, okay, so I'm having this problem at work right now. There's this person that I'm super frustrated with, and I don't know, maybe it's me, maybe it's them, but I guess I'm looking for some advice on how to interact with them.
I understand workplace frustrations can be challenging. Could you tell me a bit more about what's causing the friction? Sometimes understanding the root of the problem can help in finding a solution.
I don't know, I'm just...
Also, have you considered talking to this person directly, perhaps in a neutral setting, to try and understand their perspective?
I appreciate that. And yeah, I guess I could go talk to them. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling this.
It's completely natural to feel angry when facing conflict. Acknowledging your emotions is a crucial first step. Perhaps taking a moment to cool down before approaching the conversation would be beneficial. Would you like to explore some de-escalation techniques or strategies for managing anger in a constructive way?
Yeah, I guess so. What would you do?
If I were in your situation, I would first try to identify the specific triggers causing my anger. Pinpointing those triggers can help in understanding the root of the issue. Then, I would explore techniques like deep breathing exercises or mindfulness practices to manage the emotional response. Finally, I would focus on communicating my concerns clearly and respectfully, emphasizing the impact of the other person's actions on my work or well-being, rather than resorting to personal attacks or accusations.
Well, just one more thing then, which is do you think that will I feel better after that?
While there's no guarantee you'll immediately feel better after the conversation, addressing the issue directly can often lead to a sense of relief and closure. Even if the outcome isn't ideal, taking proactive steps to resolve conflict can empower you and reduce the likelihood of similar frustrations arising in the future. It's a step towards a more positive and productive work environment.
Cool. Thanks for your help.
Can you give me your kind of rapid diagnostic assessment on that interaction relative in particular to like a pie interaction?
Yeah. So I think there were a couple of things. One, and this is subtle, there's an amount of time in terms of speech and turn taking. Yeah. It's actually different for every culture and every person, right? Tuning that and sort of being responsive matters. Two, I didn't get a sense, and this was good, by the way. I thought it was pretty good. I didn't get a sense of our history. There's context of who you are, but then the conversation, like this canonical thing that really struck me the first time I experienced it was that I had been visiting family, and I asked Pi, like, all right, where's a good place to get a muffalata sandwich around here? because they're tasty.
Yeah.
And got a suggestion, and then a couple days later, I'm back at home. I'm with my son. We're driving, and he loves space, and so we were going to ask Pi about different kinds of spaceships that are powered by nuclear explosions. But Pi starts off by saying, "Oh, hey, Sean, did you get a chance to try that sandwich?"
Whoa.
And there's something powerful in that.
Whoa.
To be clear, a lot of it is right now, you don't have to have the speech part as much as, I know this sounds strange, that 10 million samples of good conversation that we had, every one of them was, you have strong emotional intelligence. And so it's like taking little pieces of what is great about your conversation and putting in there. And there are all these little subtleties. So, to get it so it doesn't necessarily sound like ship's computer. Right.
Ship's computer. I like that.
Well, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's also true that these systems are evolving so that it's not just the models. It's really the architectures for these.
Yeah.
We're not the only ones who do this, but for instance, when you're using Pi or using the Inflection for Enterprise, there are actually multiple different models tuned for different kinds of things.
Right.
One is just regular conversational Pi. One is productivity Pi, which actually does give more of the book reports and is like, here's some information and facts. Let me help you.
Yeah.
There's a safety Pi when it detects that things are going awry. Right. There's a whole set of these. And these architectures are starting to get pretty interesting and complex as well about what goes out, what goes in, how you ask questions, the whole agentic part of it. And so while historically the focus has been on the model, I think we'll see more and more that the focus is actually on the system. And it's worth understanding that eventually, not for everybody, but like if you're trying to build these things, the parts of that system.
Yeah. Well, and that's mirroring back to nature too.
That's right.
It's not like the biggest species that matter. It's the ecosystem and how these interact and how there's dependencies, between and among all these participants in the network.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, the sort of collective intelligence stuff. There are some systems now, and we've experimented with this too, where you might have 12 different models all give a response that is judged by 12 other different models, which are then going to another thing, and and it's like, there's a whole team of machines that are all doing this together.
Yeah.
It's like cells. Right?
Yeah.
They're starting to work together.
Yeah. Why do enterprises want what Inflection is offering? And what led you all to move more heavily into enterprise and away from a consumer-facing approach?
So there are a couple of reasons why an enterprise would want to work with us. The first is that we understand this is a system, not just a model. And so you'll see some things where people are saying, well, we can just use this open source model. It's great. But it turns out to actually be pretty complex, and we can help them with that, both in turnkey ways and in ways where we work with systems integrators. And, actually, going back to the community, you don't do this stuff by yourself.
Yeah.
Right? We are still one of the handful of large language models that are frontier models, and that does make a difference for a lot of cases. It's also true that for the folks, and going back to that privacy and data protection aspect, we're one of the very few companies that will let them take our code and put it on-prem so they can actually focus on that. Now, those are kind of practical things.
Yeah.
I would add that last part, that flavor, is just going to make the entire enterprise better.
Right.
Now, that's a hard thing to sell, but I think it's true.
So they might discover that later, even if their initial choices was performance, systems integration, data and privacy controls that are above and beyond what they might take from a more centralized cloud-based operator.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and also, like if you're building a skyscraper or a cathedral, you use poor materials, it will fall down. And I think these are better and different materials for the kinds of things that need to interact with humans.
Yeah.
And there was a second part of that question. I'm trying to remember what it was.
why the shift into enterprise and the shift away from a consumer, individual user-based experience?
I mean, a couple of reasons. One, we learned so much around the consumer side. It seemed pretty clear that from a sustainability and growth business model, we should be bringing some of that to the enterprise. Right? And if you've noticed, we announced that back in March, and now all the other companies have announced that too.
Right.
They're like, yes, we will do enterprise. And I think that's the internet for consumers would not exist without all the enterprises adopting it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's good for enterprises to use us. The reason why I think it's good for consumers is because that makes all of this better. So Pi is still there. We still have people using Pi. One of the reasons I hired our COO is I had worked with him back in the 90s when there was this brand new thing called web-based mail. And good, I got the right reaction.
Yes.
And the business model there that he had come up with, which I thought was really clever, was, well, we're going to white label and do this technology for all these companies like Excite and Wall Street Journal and Lycos, but we're also going to provide this free thing to consumers so they can use it. So if you don't own a computer or you only have access at a cafe or something like that, you still get email.
Yeah.
Right? And I sometimes joke that this is my secret plan, but it's not so secret, I guess, if I'm saying it here, which is I want us to be able to address the whole of society. I think the enterprise is the right way for us to do that so that we're building a growing business.
Yeah.
But we want to still make sure that this is accessible to everybody.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the cross-subsidy from big business to us as a fan of Robinhood and progressive taxation. I also think you're applying that in a very creative way. Thank you, Sean, for joining us today. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can get a longer version of this conversation in our audio podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review or a comment of some kind. We really appreciate it. And if you want to be part of this world even more, get exclusive, deeper cuts of my thoughts after these interviews, sign up for our Substack. You can find that at lifewithmachines.media.